Touch a bit more on what your day-to-day was like as a kid. Who inspired you? What did you want to do at that point?
Ever since I was like a kid, was really excited about building a technology company in New York. When I think it was probably about 25, maybe 26, started a company that became Yext with Howard.
You were a young kid and all you wanted to do was create a tech company. Now this is the epitome of a tech company. Let's do an IPO.
The business was growing like really well, crossing 100 million of ARR, and you start to think about what the future looks like. Going public for us was sort of an inevitability.
Talk a bit more about selling leads to gyms.
Where the whole thing fell down is gyms did not have internet access. It was a little embarrassing for a tech company, but the way we found to solve the problem was literally
This episode is brought to you by SemiAnalysis, the leading research and consulting firm for AI infrastructure and buildouts. They work closely with many hyperscalers, AI labs, hedge funds, and semiconductor companies that you know and respect. From tracking the inference economics of model deployments to every data center and the supply chains for fabs, servers, electrical equipment, and more, SemiAnalysis is an expert on the topic. If you want to learn more or work in the industry, visit semianalysis.com to see their research and purchase their models. Thanks again to SemiAnalysis and founder Dylan Patel. The Decagon project builds founding go-to-market and engineering teams for venture-backed startups in San Francisco and New York. They built founding teams at Ramp, Cursor, Decagon, Rogo, and many more, while selectively investing through their flagship venture fund. With over a decade of experience and trusted partnerships across the top 15 US-based venture firms, the Decagon project is the premier talent partner for high-slope opportunities in early-stage technology. To learn more, get in touch, or explore roles across a curated list of breakout startups, visit decagonproject.com. Sweet. Thank you, Brian. This is amazing.
having me.
A bit of a backstory for how we met is randomly over Twitter. And then we met in person, and now we're doing this interview. And so maybe you want to start as early as possible, like you mentioned, with your family's origins and how you ended up in New York and into the story.
So my family, I'll start with my grandfather, who is the earliest entrepreneur in the family I can remember. And so my grandfather came to the U.S. just as World War II was starting. He barely made it out of Nazi Germany. And started the family business was a dairy farm. And so he started a dairy farm in upstate New York. My dad grew up on that farm, and I, as a kid, would go to the farm all the time on weekends. And that's where, if you want to understand what it means to work hard, hang around a farm for a little bit. But so I grew up just outside of New York City in Rockland County, a town called New City. And so that's where I'm originally from. I've been sort of starting businesses, or they weren't really businesses, they were more like projects ever since I was a little kid. Had like a landscaping thing I was doing in high school, went to college in Cornell and got into motorcycles, was buying and selling motorcycles, and then started a motorcycle shop with a few guys called Ithaca Motorcycle Works, where I got my first introduction to really starting a business, partnership dynamics, and how important they are, and picking your co-founders and getting all that stuff right. And then when I graduated college, I went to work at, by the time it was considered like an internet marketing company called Traffics, which was a small publicly traded company. And I put my resume in the CEO's mailbox. I was sort of from the same community, knew him, and had a job a few days later, and was there for a couple of years. I started just low level operations kind of thing, and I ended up running the database marketing team there, which made up about 80% of the company's revenue. Got to know the founders of Traffics really well, and started a company, left Traffics and started a company with them, which packaged privacy protection software, sold it directly to consumers. I was 23 at the time. And we got that to about 20 million of revenue, and then stuff left. I was sort of the junior partner, and I wanted more of my own thing. And then when I think it was probably about 25, maybe 26, started the company that became Yext with Howard.
I love it. It's an amazing story. We'll zoom back to the beginning to start. And we'll eventually end with the present day and this company, Windmill. And so maybe touch a bit more on what your day-to-day was like as a kid. Who inspired you? What did you want to do at that point?
Yeah, so it was this bizarre thing. I legit, ever since I was a kid, was really excited about building a technology company in New York. I know it's a very strange thing to do, to think about when you're younger, but for whatever reason, I always found it super interesting. And I was fortunate enough to, at that stage of my life, when I was like a teenager. Internet was like just starting to become a thing, and I was fascinated by it. And it was so clearly going to be the future. It's not dissimilar from what's going on in the world now, where it's like sort of overwhelmingly obvious. It was overwhelmingly obvious to me that that's what I wanted to be doing and focused on, and how I wanted to spend my time. But it was also obvious to me that nothing that was like terribly relevant was actually being taught in school. I was a terrible student. I never went to class. I had my freshman year of college, I actually went to school in Israel for the year. I had the lowest attendance rate in the history of the school. Kids with better attendance rates than me got thrown out for their attendance. Um, but
How'd they let you say that? What were you doing when you were going to school?
So I was up front with the guy running the program when I got there about my intentions. And I basically, I thought I was excited about it because I thought it was an opportunity to really like travel around the country and really learn that way. I was not interested in sitting in like Econ 101 when I'm like, get a chance to be in Israel for the year. And so the way the program was represented, I thought they misrepresented and thought like you're going to have like more free time to travel and explore. And so I went to the guy running the program at the very beginning and told him my intentions. And it's like, look, I want to travel and enjoy the country and experience it, not like sit in class. I'm not going to go to class. I'll show up and take the tests. I'll pass everything. But like, I'm not going to be sitting in class. If that's not going to work for you, like I can leave now. And so he was like cool with it, to his credit. And so it worked out. I got a little bit of the best of both worlds. But then when I went to college, when I was up at Cornell, it was clear like nothing that was being taught in school had anything really to do with the internet, because there's this like emerging thing. Just like for students now, and like we hire a lot of kids like right out of school, like there's not really that much that can be taught in school that's going to really in my opinion, really help prepare them for people that want to be on the cutting edge of what's happening in AI. There's some programs here and there, but on balance, if you look across the entire university system, it's not the most valuable way people can spend their time. In my opinion, if you want to be part of startups and tech, is go start a company, is to go do something, join an early stage company. And so anyway, I had that realization. For me, it was the internet early on in college. And so
Nice. How would your parents have described you when you were a young kid?
they would have said I was an underachiever, probably, to be honest. Like I always got the sense as a kid, they were very supportive, and people would think they thought I was like very smart and capable, and I always got that reinforcement from them. But I like did not do terribly well in school, and was not like super interested in it, and would spend my time on other things. And so I think they always felt, at least academically, I was like underachieving.
That's funny. And were a bunch of your friends doing this? You were the odd one out?
Um, no, a bunch of my friends I think would be considered underachievers as well. I'm sure they'd love to hear that. But I was always a little bit of a oddball in terms of like really liking to tinker and play with things, and always thinking about like ways to make money too, and stuff like that.
Were there any mentors or teachers at this time? Maybe there were people online versus in person.
So not really in like high school. In college, one of the guys I started a motorcycle shop with was really quite helpful. A guy actually, it's sort of funny. One of the partners at First Round, Bill Trenchard, if you happen to know Bill,
Forget this.
he presented his company to. I figured out as an undergrad, I could basically just like sit in all the management school classes, the Cornell like MBA classes. No one would kick me out, and that was the only place like interesting stuff about the internet was happening, and so. Bill was presenting in this Professor Ben McDaniel's class about, I think it was called Jumpstart or Jump Networks or something like that. And it's a company he had built, which was like the first like calendar company. And he sold it to Microsoft. It's what became Hotmail, if you remember Hotmail back in the day. And I remember being like fascinated by that and just thinking it was like the coolest thing. He was probably in his like early 20s at the time and had like built this company and sold it for a ton of money to Microsoft, and just being totally fascinated by that.
That's funny. And what exactly you study at Cornell?
So I started as the undergrad business major, and then I figured out that there was this major called General Studies, where basically, if you declared that as your major, you did not have to take any requirements and you could take whatever you want. And so I technically graduated as, I think, one of two general studies majors out of everyone in my graduating class.
It's very funny. And tell us a bit of the story of how you ended up going from there to then, you said, putting your resume in the CEO's mailbox and joining Trafix, which is a small publicly traded company.
Yeah. So it was a winding course. Literally, when I graduated college, I didn't want to go. I'd made some money. I had a couple jobs as like buying and selling motorcycles. I built the online storefront for a Ducati dealership, and I wanted to. What I really wanted to do was ride my motorcycle across the country, and then was considering riding it down to the Darien Gap. There's like this 80 miles of jungle that connects Central America to South America. And so I bought like a wrecked like old BMW bike and was riding it around the country for nearly 3 months, and was a couple days from crossing into Mexico on September 11th. This is 2001. And when that happened, like I was local to New York with my friends here, and I was like, all right, I just need to come home. And so rode home as fast as I could, then sort of didn't know what to do. And I was like, all right, I guess I should like get a job. And was trying to find companies that were like sort of doing internet-y kind of stuff. And this was one that jumped out.
Yeah. Was there any intention behind this company, or was it just one of a variety of them and you just decided and happened to go to Trafix?
There wasn't, honestly, there wasn't like a ton of intention behind it. I sort of knew a little bit from the community, a couple of the people that were running it. And one of the things that was very appealing from chatting with a couple of the senior people there is that they really were open-minded about giving young people opportunity. It wasn't like a huge company. It was 100, 150 people, something like that. And I knew of a couple people that were probably 2, 3, 4 years older than me at the time that were like running departments there, and that seemed really appealing.
Just to contrast, you mentioned Trafix was 100, 150. How big is Yext now in terms of headcount?
I don't know what it is exactly now, but it's got up to about 2,500 people, I think, something like that.
Just wanted to contrast. We'll touch on that later.
Yeah.
But cool. Talk a bit more about your time there and then how you eventually started your first company.
Yeah, so at Trafix, it's basically running database marketing, which was all about just taking the different promotional offers you had at a company and how to combine it with the data you had, like the lists, in the most effective way possible. And I was like pretty good at figuring that out. It was basic math and very basic just instincts about what people are going to respond to, and you can just like look at all the data. And so if you're willing to sort of put the work in and deeply understand all of it, you can get really good at it really quickly. And so I was like 22, 23, and got put in charge of a team of, I started as a peer. This is a complicated thing a lot of people go through in their career, where you're sort of peers with a group and then you get promoted and all of a sudden you're running the group and your whole dynamic changes. And I was like 22 or 23 when I was like promoted to run the group, and there was like people on the team that were like in their 40s. It's just this like really weird thing, and that was kind of my introduction to management, and that for me was a really incredible learning experience because logic and math would win over any kind of like personal whatever. I have decades of experience doing like XYZ. And it was a position where I was directly working with like the CEO and the executive team, and helping inform them, putting together guidance and like stuff like that. And so really got exposed to a lot at an early stage. And not that it was a huge company, but it was also like a quick introduction for me that I like really enjoyed, like running a team, and that did not do very well with constraints. Like had my way I wanted to do things, and pushed me towards like wanting to start my own company and having my own thing. That became pretty clear pretty fast.
I love it. And you met Howard at Trafix. Tell us a bit about that story and how Howard actually got to Trafix.
Yes. So Howard, so we got to know each other at Trafix. He never worked at Trafix. So the way we sort of met is he built a company called Just a Tip, where you can send anonymous tips to your friends about their annoying habits, if I remember all this properly. That like Jon Stewart or something sent something on the Daily Show, and it all of a sudden like blew up, and he was getting like a ton of traffic. He sold that company to Traffics, and then I was all of a sudden in charge of managing that list, the data there, and how to market to that customer base. And so we spoke on the phone like a few times as I was like trying to figure it out, but we didn't really know each other very well. And then he, subsequent to that, built a software consulting firm that he sold to a company called Daytran. The founder of Daytran was also the founder of Traffics, a guy named Jay Greenwald. And so Jay became a mentor to me, and he was a mentor to Howard. And he's the one who really like put us together. And so when I left Traffics and started that privacy protection software company, I started it with Jay. And so Jay, like I was basically running one of Jay's companies. Howard was running another one, and we actually started getting together all the time, play basketball, and just sort of try to figure out what the hell we were doing. And that's how we got to know each other.
I love it. And just to touch on basketball, when did your love for basketball start? I know you're a massive Knicks fan.
Very, very early. I'm a big Knicks fan. To be honest, when high school and when I was younger, I was a huge Michael Jordan fan, and like really loved the Bulls, and was always so conflicted when they played the Knicks.
MJ or LeBron?
I mean, MJ, it's not even close. I don't know why people think there's a debate, but that's not even close to me. But no, it was always basketball was always my sport since I was young.
Cool. And then I guess this is a good segue into your first company.
Yeah.
And maybe touch a bit more on your time there, and then leaving and starting what ended up being Yext with Howard.
That company, it had a sort of placeholder name called CDS. We were basically packaging at the time. What was like sort of popular was all this like antivirus privacy protection kind of software. Everyone felt like they needed Norton antivirus and WebRoot and all this kind of stuff. And so you had to, if you were buying it directly from them, it was like an upfront annual contract, or you're spending like hundreds of dollars. We would basically buy a ton of licenses wholesale and then sell it on a monthly subscription basis to consumers. So rather than spending $200 a year on all this stuff, you can spend, $8.99 a year with us, or something like that.
They gave you the license to do that?
Yeah.
Damn, you're driving that much revenue.
Yes.
Oh, interesting.
Yes.
Do you have any numbers behind how much you would buy at once?
I don't remember off the top of my head, but the company got up to about 20 million of revenue in 3 years. So
And then you left.
a lot. Yeah, I had like a little sliver of it. And we got up to, it was like 70, 80 people. I sort of ran all the day-to-day of the company, what would now be considered like a COO type role. And then I had 3 co-founders and partners. Jay was one of them, and 2 other guys that were 3-headed kind of CEO type thing. And I always wanted more of my own thing and more of my own company, and they knew that. We talked about it like pretty openly, and so we did that for a few years, and then I left to start. Howard had just left like Daytran and was ready to start something, and we felt like we complemented each other like pretty well and wanted to do something together, and so the timing matched up.
Talk a bit more about that company, Gym Ticket, selling leads to gyms, and the story behind it.
Yeah, so we started selling leads to gyms. We actually started trying to sell memberships, which did not work at all. And so the original idea was where we thought there was an opportunity was to aggregate the market and function as sort of like a online media buyer for the industry, delivering customers on a performance basis to gyms. So the gym industry is like really fragmented. There's, independent gyms, there's regional gyms, national gyms, whatever. The way media buying worked at the time, if you were going to try to like buy keywords on Google, you couldn't really target it well. And so if like you're here in Manhattan and you were a gym and you wanted to buy like keywords, you're going to be getting clicks from like the tri-state area where no one's going to like, people don't join your gym outside of like a 5-block radius. And so we built a site called gymticket.com. We would buy national media. People could sort of look in their zip code, choose a place that they're interested in. And where we started with the idea was that they could buy a membership online. And we got a bunch of gyms like lined up to do this, whatever. It did not work. Yeah. It was a total disaster. For a reason we really didn't see coming. We thought we figured out all the hard pieces, which was like how do we like buy the media, drive the traffic, get them to convert on the site, get people to take out their credit card, buy whatever. We figured out all those pieces. Where the whole thing fell down is gyms did not have internet access at their front desks. So the consumer behavior was people would buy a membership and then immediately go to the gym wanting to like get their first workout in. Well,
The gym had no clue.
yeah, had no clue. People would walk in like be like, "Hey, I just bought a membership. You're not in the system," and so it didn't work. We actually switched it to be a lead-based model, and this is a little embarrassing for a tech company, but the way we found to solve the problem was literally the thing that every gym had at the front desk was actually a fax machine.
Yeah.
And so we faxed the information to gyms, and they got that, and that worked. Long story short, it worked. We got over 4,000 gyms in the country signed up. We were driving a lot of traffic. We were delivering customers to them on a performance basis at a third of the industry average, and that actually ended up working pretty well.
Wow. And then you took this thing that worked well in the gym vertical and you expanded, right, to all these other verticals.
That's right. So we sort of had this like strategic decision. Do we basically want to sell like more stuff to like gyms and health clubs, or do we want to expand across all these different verticals? We expanded to work with veterinarians, chiropractors, and auto repair shops, like all this. We basically built this like pretty sophisticated model where we look at all the categories and like yellow page books and like had a whole qualification thing to try to figure out what would actually make it a good business for us.
What would your parents say at this time? Were you still an underachiever of some sorts?
My parents at the time sort of thought I sold like computers out of the back of a truck or something like that. They didn't, it was like a hard thing to explain, but they like thought it was generally going well. And so at least, they felt okay about it.
On a tangent, do you have any advice to people now who are starting companies, doing things, dropped out, etc., and their parents say, "What the fuck are you doing?" And they don't really understand. But maybe the individual has some sort of intention, and they can't really convey it. Do you have any advice?
It's a hard thing, and that's where I feel really fortunate that my parents were like pretty supportive of all kinds of like nonsense through the years. I think it is an important thing. Like one thing that should be, I felt like I could sort of articulate to my parents in like a decent way why at least this was like a relatively interesting and good thing to do. Yeah. If I couldn't get them to understand it, I'd have a real hard time getting anyone else to. So I actually think it's worthwhile for people to spend time. Almost think of your parents as like you're pitching like a VC, and if you can't convince them and they have objections, why actually like dig in and work through. And it's not that they're necessarily going to know the right answer, not like they're going to have a ton of context necessarily on the business, the technology, or whatever, but what they will know is you. They'll know you probably better than anyone else you talk to in the space, and so their sort of objections or concerns
probably valid.
Yeah, there might be some help there. Mm-hmm. Pitch your parents.
Good. I love it. And so give us a story of how you turned into Yext and why is it called Yext?
We expanded that business across about 20 to 25 different verticals. And they were really like great businesses, like individually and kind of laddered together into a good business overall. The idea with Yext, as we were naming, we started off with like the names of all like the separate brands. And then we actually had the corporate entity was called Alpha 411. Just as like a placeholder kind of name. And then once we were ready to really brand the overall company and wanted to do that properly, we went through a process to try to figure out a good name where there's a science behind like sort of components of words and how to combine them together or whatever. One of the people on the team like built a program to sort of combine them all and then look up different domains. And Yext was a 4-letter domain that wasn't terribly expensive. We wanted a short domain name. And so it's a combination of like the next yellow pages type thing, the evolution of how that worked.
Yeah, that's cool stuff. And your core role was probably in the COO type realm, right?
I mean, I spend the vast majority of my time on like go-to-market distribution-y kind of stuff. Generally speaking, that was my wheelhouse. There's like, sort of early days of like everyone sort of doing everything. There was like really dark days where I was directly responsible for like legal and finance and all that kind of stuff. But that was like sort of generally what I spent time on.
Do you have any stories from those early days that maybe aren't as public? Maybe some times when things are really hard or things of the sort?
Our office caught fire once the first day we moved in. When you're an early stage company, you sort of move through offices like pretty quickly if you're doing it right, in my opinion. You want to always feel like you're bursting out of a space. And so um, we were on our third office in probably 2 years, and it was our first like sort of more substantial office. I think it was like 2,400 square feet. We had our own floor in this like small building. And so um, we have the day we're moving in. Howard had to be on the West Coast in an investor meeting. I think it was a partner meeting for Sutter Hill. And so I was like moving us, like getting the whole company like moved into the office. We were maybe 20, 25 employees at the time. And so we're moving in, we just get everything settled. And it's like the kind of thing where we're like wheeling the chairs down the street, carrying computers or whatever. We're not just like showing up, and there was like a moving company that did it. And so we're all moved into the office. We're feeling good. At the back of the office, there's a small conference room I like cram everyone into. And I think we're like having lunch, and like everyone's like excited and happy. And then out the back window of that conference room, we see flames like shooting out from the restaurant. It turned out underneath us. There's an Indian restaurant. All of a sudden, everyone like goes running out of the office, whatever. The fire department like shows up, and they like break the windows down, and there was like this huge kitchen fire underneath. And so that was our welcome to our new office kind of moment, which is always a good reminder that just when you think everything's all set, you might have flames shooting up from the floor underneath you.
Do you have any fun stories of traveling and having to close clients, and how you actually got good at go-to-market and sales and distribution?
So I guess in the U.S. first, and then I'll touch on some international stuff. The U.S. I didn't realize is the differences in like different parts of the country, and so one embarrassing mistake, I can't believe I'm telling this, I made. We were down in Memphis. We were selling to ServiceMaster and FedEx. I was like so excited to be down there and hadn't really spent much time in the South. And we go out to lunch. I think it was lunch with like the ServiceMaster team. And I'd never heard of a hush puppy before, which if you're not familiar is like a fried thing of cornmeal. And we're sitting at lunch, and someone orders them, and I have one. I think it's like the most delicious thing I've had in my life. And so I have like 5 or 6 of them, which is a terrible idea before you're in like meetings all day, and then go directly from there from like this giant like FedEx pitch with like their executive team, and feel like I'm like falling asleep on my feet. It was just terrible mistake. But anyway, learning in the U.S. like all the different regions, different types of people, how to talk to people, how to position things. It all genuinely is different in different areas of the country.
Did you close FedEx?
Yeah, FedEx was a customer of ours. We did end up getting them. Steve Pachenko was the guy over there. I still remember. He's great. And then I set up all our businesses, and we really built out our distribution internationally. We had offices in London, Paris, Berlin, Milan, Tokyo, and even an office in Shanghai. Learning all the nuance. I won't bore you with all the nuance in all the different countries, but one of the really funny ones was in Tokyo, where I'd never been there before in my life, and felt like a lot of we had this amazing guy who was running the office there, Uda-san. And Uda-san was the chairman and CEO of Salesforce Japan. He was the CTO of the Tokyo 2020 Olympics. And so we were thrilled, like he joined the team to be the CEO of Yext Japan. And I remember showing up, he had like lined up these meetings with like, for him, he just like walks into like the chairman and CEOs of like the largest companies in all of Japan. And so I wanted to make sure I did like a really good job. I'd never been there before. And so I didn't own like a nice suit, to be frank. And so buy like a really nice, like conservative navy suit and shoes and like the whole thing. And I come out of my hotel, he like picks me up in a car, and I'm like wearing what I think is my like very conservative Japanese kind of thing. And he like berates me. He's like, no, what are you doing? You do not want to look like a Japanese person. You want to look like a stereotypical American founder. Like, go back and change. And he makes me like go change into like jeans and a t-shirt. And that's how we like rolled up to all the different meetings, which was just a very, very important lesson for early stage founders, is you're like learning these things. Like, first off, find people that are local that can help coach you on this stuff. Like you're not going to learn these kind of things from just like reading stuff online or whatever. Um, and understand that a big part of your job is actually in these types of meetings is to actually play a role. And be mindful of that. Figure out what that right role is to play, what people expect to hear, what they're going to respond to. Because if you don't get that stuff right, you could have the best message in the world, but it's not going to be heard the way you want.
Yeah. Are there any fun sales tactics or things you did during your Yext days, and some really interesting things that spurred growth that maybe set you guys apart?
I made up that we had employees we did not as one thing. I don't know if I should share, but like I basically created like we were like a tiny company, a handful of people. When you're selling to larger brands and companies, they don't necessarily want to work with, it's a little different now, but they don't necessarily want to work with like, 5 people in a room. And so to help us seem more substantial than we were, I would basically set up alternate email addresses and even pretend to have like internal conversations with external people. Oh, we want to do this. Let me introduce you to your account manager, XYZ. That were not real people. It's a little harder to do today with LinkedIn, but it worked really well back in the day.
You would CC fake team members.
Yep.
How many fake people were there?
There were like 3 or 4 different personas. Like sort of an account manager kind of person, like sales engineering type person.
And how old were you at this point?
How old was I? 24, 25, something like that. Maybe 26 even. Yeah.
Cool. And you were in New York the entire time?
Yeah, we started Yext at the end of 2006, in New York the entire time. Yeah, for me, I couldn't imagine building a company anywhere else.
We'll finish the Yext story in a bit, but I know you have a lot of takes on New York versus SF, and it'd be fun to hear. And to ruin the surprise, you think New York is much better. And so let's hear the takes.
There's a lot of conversation about New York versus like SF and the Bay Area. And where there, I think, is getting to be a little bit more parity is on the early stage side of things. And so if you look at sort of early stage investment or start, seed company, Series A or whatever, the data is like comparable. It'll go back and forth quarter by quarter, whatever. And so you can have a reasonable debate about the early stage ecosystem, where I think New York is way behind the Bay Area. And if you're having a larger conversation about the technology industry, where I think New York frankly comes up short and is one of the bigger issues that needs to be addressed, is when you look at later stage companies, and particularly companies that have really reached like size and scale. Like New York does not have that many companies that have gone public or reached like a huge level of scale and are operating at that scale. And it's a big problem for the city, to be frank. And there's a handful of companies like MongoDB, Datadog, and Kevin Ryan's companies, Business Insider, and started Mongo also, and Guild Group back in the day. But there's really not that many. And so what happens is you're missing a part of the ecosystem where you have those early teams that go on to huge success, that have sort of seen the movie, that can go on to populate and join like other startups as they're starting to really scale up and grow, have gone through the process of going public, that can sort of help the ecosystem to keep growing. And so I think that's going to be the real question over the next decade or so is, does New York have companies that really reach, not success at the early stage, but at the later stage? And how does that compare to the Bay Area?
Yeah. What is your role on the board of Tech NYC? And you're a core part of that?
I try to be, so for me, something that's like personally very important is when we were building Yext, there was like basically no tech community in the city. There wasn't anyone we can really go to and talk about things. There was very few sources of capital. And I feel very fortunate that I did have like some people that kind of helped me along, but this is New York's home for me. I intend to be here, my entire life. And I care deeply about the tech ecosystem and try to do whatever I can to support it and to help particularly help founders. And so on Tech NYC, Tech NYC is a great organization, and they try to promote the tech industry in New York, which has an increasingly loud voice in the city. And the city is primarily, and this is one of the things that really the city has going for it, is it's not exclusively tech like the Bay Area is. The finance industry is huge here, the real estate industry, fashion, retail. There's a lot of other industries. And so what Tech NYC helps to do is help the tech community come together and have a voice as it relates to city and state policy and like the types of things that are important for tech companies.
Who are some notable people on that list or on the board?
So Fred Wilson chairs it from Union Square Ventures, Kevin Ryan, I mentioned, Neil Blumenthal, the founder and CEO of Warby Parker. It's a great group. Most of the larger sort of tech companies and larger VC firms in the city have some type of representation on the board. So the work they do is very helpful. I'd actually encourage anyone who's interested in tech in New York. They actually have a great newsletter. Just sign up for the newsletter if you want to know what's going on. It's the best source of information on startups and what's going on in the community. Now, where I do think New York City has some huge advantages, which is part of what's coming into play with the early stage stuff, is that most founders, particularly a little bit younger, would rather live in New York City than in the Bay Area. There's just a lot more going on. And so I was just chatting with, I know you know Teddy Solomon from Fizz the other day, and his story is just like a great one where he had, they were in the Bay Area. He had a 25-person company. The company's growing like crazy, doing fantastic. And he's just like, this is boring. There's like nowhere to, I can't even go out to like eat dinner past like 8 o'clock. You're going to the same 3 places all the time. And he basically just decided to move his whole team and company to New York. They all moved, and he is absolutely loving it. And he just thinks it's like crazy that other founders have not figured this out yet. And so that's one of the big advantages New York City has, is particularly if you're a little younger, like it's a far better place to live and for a whole variety.
Agreed. And so to contrast, this wasn't the case when you were forming Yext, and it's sort of what you wish was there back then.
Yeah, well, what's interesting is that New York was always a very desirable place for younger people to live and work at a school, but there wasn't the techie. If you wanted to work in tech and be in New York, that was a little challenging. And so you'd get the people that wanted to live in New York would largely go into finance. I used to actually go back to Cornell, and there was, I used to go to one of the business professors' class, would invite me up every year, and I give a talk to the kids, which was titled "Keep Kids Off the Street," meaning Wall Street. There are other things to do with your career than go into finance. And obviously, I'm biased, but think tech is very, very interesting.
That's funny. Like, you zoom back a bit to now. At this point, Yext is growing rapidly. You're in New York, and how do you eventually IPO? What's that latter half of the story there?
The business was growing like really well. We had amazing customers. Like the product was like fantastic. And so as we're sort of getting into those sizes, those kind of larger sizes, you're crossing 100 million of ARR. And you start to think about what the future looks like. Like going public for us was like sort of an inevitability. Like maybe someone like shows up and wants to buy you for like stupid money. Okay, cool. It's a little different now, but this was in 2015, 2016 that we're really thinking about it deeply. And we went public in 2017, early 2017. That was always the path, that if you're going to build a giant company, like you're going to go public at some point. That's just a step on the journey. And so for us, it was just like, okay, that's like the next thing to do. Let's like prepare to do this and do it.
Were you, I guess, explain a bit about your feeling and experience at the time? Because as you mentioned, you're a young kid and all you wanted to do was create a tech company. Now this is the epitome of a tech company. That's your IPO. What was that feeling like?
Yeah, so it's sort of stressful leading up to it. You don't totally know what to expect. That day was, it's really like a surreal kind of experience. You get up in the morning, and I remember having to like get dressed nicely because you're going to like the stock exchange, and you get there and they let you bring a lot of folks from your company there. And so we had I think we had about 150 people from Yext that were there. And there's like a big banner on the side of the New York Stock Exchange with your company's name and logo. And they do a great job with all the kind of pomp and circumstance. Like, I don't think there's actually trading that happens anymore on the floor. They're basically putting on a show for the company, but it was just, honestly, it was like the coolest thing. Just, ringing the bell and when you have the first trade, there's all these. I didn't totally understand the dynamics, but there's you want to make sure that the first trade is like you price things right the night before, and there's like this opening day, sort of pop and excitement, and it all went incredibly well, and it was just like, I don't know, I remember just sort of feeling like I was like sort of floating through this whole like crazy day, and you're there with your team, and you want to make sure everyone's sort of into it and excited and gets to be like part of the experience. And, those 150, I remember we had to like curate a list because you have to choose who those people are, which is really hard. And we went over the allocated amount by like 20 or 30 people. I think we like sort of decided like, let's just do it. If more people show up, are they really going to turn them away? Like, let's see what happens. And so being able to sort of share a moment like that with people that had been on the journey from very early on, I mean, it's really like just like most incredible experience that day. And then you have this like weird thing where it all happens really early. You're like done by like 10, 11 in the morning. And then I remember like going back to my office and literally just like sitting in my office. And I made it a point. I told everyone that day, the day before, to just call a bunch of our like customers and who were like very early on the journey, just to thank them. And I thought that was sort of an important way to spend the day. And then we had like a big blowout crazy party on the floor of the stock exchange that night. But it's absolutely amazing.
Nice. As a through line between the start of Yext and all these other companies and then IPO, how much did money and capital matter to you? Was it a driver? Is it a driver now? And I guess some people start companies for the sake of making money, and some people start them for a different passion. There's a variety of debates and counter cases to go about. But what was your driver, and how much did money and capital actually matter?
Yeah, personally, I mean, I think anyone who says it's like not a factor at all, it's not totally truthful. Um, it was definitely always a driver for me, particularly with like Yext. I'd basically put my like life savings into the business. And one of the things about New York, which I think is actually is a healthy dynamic for founders, is it's expensive to live here. And so if your intention is to live here like your entire adult life, you have to make a lot of money. And a big part of the founder journey is that basically where you're not going to make a lot of money from salary, you're going to make it from equity. And that's just the way it goes.
What do you think is the minimum amount to comfortably live in New York?
I don't know, but a big factor there is kids. And so if you don't have kids, it's a much lower number. If you have kids, it's like a much higher number. So you're sort of, if you're going to go on that founder journey, you're going to basically make that gamble where you'd have years and years and years where you're not going to make a lot of like cash, like salary. You're not going to be able to save up a lot of money, but the idea that you're going to get to like an equity event. And so when you do, and you can tuck a bunch of money away, then so it is a motivating factor to get to an equity event. Like that, particularly if you tend to have kids and start a family and that kind of thing.
What was it like having kids and actually balancing both of those worlds?
The biggest piece of advice I give founders, which I got this wrong, is basically whatever you do, just don't have your first kid and start a company at exactly the same time, which is what I did. And so had my son, I think he was born like 3 months or something after, maybe 6 months after we started the company.
Wow.
Something like that, which is incredibly difficult. Like if you can avoid it at all, just don't do that.
And you have 3 kids. When you have other kids?
18-year-old, 6-year-old, and 3-year-old.
Cool. Big gap.
Big gap. Big gap. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah. But no, having kids is the best. It's a very, if you have success as like a startup founder, it's a very grounded exercise because they can give two shits about whatever. Um, and so it's just absolutely the best.
I love it. What was a bit of that final story like where you left Yext and then now start a new company and the little time period
Yeah.
in between?
Here, I'll go a little bit earlier than right when I left. So for us as a company, COVID was incredibly difficult. And so our entire business was predicated on people going to physical locations. We were very heavy across, retail, travel, hospitality, healthcare, all the like heavily affected verticals. And so we made a choice at the early onset of COVID. We can see the business was heavily impacted. And we basically made the choice that we wanted to try to keep, we thought we had an extraordinary team and we wanted to try to keep the team intact. And even though basically customers were canceling and we couldn't really sell our product at the time, we tried to pivot our product strategy and our go-to-market. And we had some things we were cooking up, which we're in a kind of slow roll, but we tried to like accelerate. Long story short, that did not work. Um, Probably in hindsight, like we couldn't bring ourselves to like lay off a ton of the company at the early onset of a global pandemic. And in hindsight, that probably would have been the right thing to do. Um, and so as we sort of recovered from all of that, we turned over a lot of our leadership. Howard moved on. Our chairman, Mike Walrath, came on as CEO. And so I basically sort of stayed on through that transition and tried to be as helpful as I could to Mike to get everything set up, and then moved out of an operating role. I stayed on the board for a little bit until my term was up. And basically by that time, I was like very confident I wanted to start Windmill. And so wanted to put all my energy there. I had sort of a slow roll where out of an operating role and just on the board, I had kind of a few months, and then I had a few months after I stepped off the board before I formally got going with Windmill. But in that like sort of first like few month period, I promised my wife and everyone I know, no matter what, I just won't start another company. That's definitely off the table. And everyone who knows me well was like, okay, whatever, don't believe you. But and it truly was my intention. But I got really excited. I'd basically been wanting to build Windmill for about a decade, and then got really excited because I sort of have the luxury of there's only like a handful of people in the world I would like start a company with at this point in my career. And one of them is my co-founder, Max Shaw, and he happened to be available and very excited about the same space that I was. And so was excited to start another company. And so went back on my promise to everyone.
What did you plan to do if you weren't going to start a company?
I sort of was exploring the professional investing route. I mean, VCs, starting my own funds, something like that. But I was never like terribly excited about it. It was more I was going to like take 6 months and just not do anything. But turns out I'm not good at that.
What's the TLDR on Windmill?
Here, so to rewind a little bit, through running Yext, we probably had in the order of 15, 20,000 people come through the company. And I always felt like the people management side of things was far and away the most important. And apologies if there's any pieces of HR tech you love, but I basically thought all of them were a giant flaming pile of garbage. Um, and one of the fundamental reasons why is that they're all built for HR teams and people teams. They're not built for the end users of the software. And so I thought the whole thing was ridiculous. People are the most important. You talk to any founder, they'll talk about people being the most important thing in their company. Well, why is there not like good technology? Why don't you have good systems and ways you like run this and manage this? And conversely, for most people, like talk to most people, they're miserable in their jobs. It's like pretty terrible. And so like, why is that the case? Why are people not finding the right companies, the right role? Why are they spending their time, the bulk of their day in a way that's unfulfilling? It's totally crazy. And it's because they're not doing meaningful work. And so what I think so the way we talk about Windmill is as an AI management company. And the way we think about management is it's not like a job, but it's a system for how a company runs. And so what we're starting with is helping companies are unique. They all have their own systems for how they do goal management, performance management, how people are giving feedback, cultures are unique, the way communication happens. And so giving companies their own way to implement that system that makes sense for them at all the different levels, because running a sales team is very different from running an engineering team. Even within like a sales organization, you'll have managers that operate in different fashions. So what we're sort of set out to do at Windmill is to help companies be able to automate the system that they want to run for their organization. So first off, you just save a ton of time, but more importantly, you end up with a team that's really focusing their energy and attention in the right way. You're reducing cycle times, and employees can have a better experience because they're actually doing the right meaningful work, and where they need help, they're getting help and feedback and coaching in the right way.
Nice. I love it. And I guess as we come to a close, a couple broader questions to get you thinking a bit and mention them to you prior. What is the kindest thing that somebody has done for you?
Yeah, so this is a little bit of a lame answer, but it's actually like my parents as I was like thinking about it, and specifically, where I think they were very kind is, have you ever heard this sort of a notion between like kind of ruling with like an iron fist versus an iron stomach? Iron fist is like, haha, here's exactly what we're gonna do. Iron stomach is the ability to kind of tolerate a lot. One of they were able to tolerate a lot, and so I mentioned like terrible attendance in school. I like also took off from college and was like riding a motorcycle around the country for like 3 months, and there's a bunch of other stuff like that. And so I think it was an incredibly kind thing that they were not, that they were able to sort of tolerate a lot of that, which gave me the freedom to explore and make mistakes and figure a bunch of things out for myself, which I think is one of the better gifts a parent can give a child.
I love it. That's a great question that Patrick O'Shaughnessy always asks. One of that's like best. So pull it from him.
Yeah.
And to close, the last question is, if there's a book about your life, what would the title be?
Oh boy. Um, hmm. Be something related to like a dairy farm or starting there or
Yeah,
farm to tech
I like it.
kind of thing, something like that.